Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and in this video, we're going to be going over some pros and cons for the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. Now this is a fairly new phone being released in November of 2020, so only a few months ago, and we're going to be going over some of the best and worst things about it. For more information about the pricing and availability of the device, definitely check the link in the description because pricing and availability are always changing. That being said, let's get started. So the first pro of this phone is the display. This phone has a 6.49-inch IPS LCD display in 90 Hz with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 406, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 83.5%. So this is a really high-quality display. It's actually not too often that you find a 90 Hz display on a phone of this level. This is more of a mid-level phone, so that's really nice to see. With a 90 Hz display, it's going to be a lot smoother, a lot more high quality, and just give an overall better experience. The PPI is also really high as well, and the screen is on the larger side. So overall, if you're doing something like content consumption or gaming, or even just looking at things on the web with not only a higher quality display, but also a larger display as well, it's just gonna look that much nicer. And with such a high screen to body ratio, the bezels are really thin, as you can see here, and accompanied by a hole punch front facing camera that I really like a lot. It gives the phone a nice modern look that's overall pleasing to the eye. Now the first con for this phone is that it has no wireless charging. Now this isn't really that uncommon for a phone of this level. Usually wireless charging is reserved for more flagship and higher end phones, but at the same time, I have seen more mid-range and lower-end phones with wireless charging, and this phone does have a lot of unique, pretty nice features. So I would think that with that in mind, they would have considered adding wireless charging as well, and it's a disappointment that they didn't. Wireless charging is a really convenient option to have, especially if, say, you're using your charging port for something else, or the charging port is damaged and you need to get it repaired. In those situations, you're not going to be able to charge your phone, whereas with wireless charging, you're still going to have that option in those situations. And even if those don't come up, it's still a nice thing to have just as an alternative. Now, the next pro for this phone is that it has NFC. That's a really nice feature to see on this phone because a lot of phones in the same price range don't have NFC. Now, in case you didn't know, NFC is the technology responsible for Google Pay and Samsung Pay and Apple Pay and all of that. And those payment features are getting more and more widely accepted, more common. And in this day and age, it's really nice to have a good contactless option too to make payments. Not only that, but it's really convenient. You don't have to worry about digging your wallet out of your pocket when you're, say, at a self-checkout, or if you're going through a drive-through, or whatever the case may be. It's just a lot more convenient to be able to make payments with your phone instead of having to use an actual card. And it's always disappointing when these mid-range phones don't have it just because they're mid-range phones. It's a pretty common technology, so I would think that they should all have it, but it's definitely nice to see that this phone does have it because a lot of phones in a similar range don't, and it really gives you the option. It's nice to have access to this whole new set of features. Now, the next con I have for this phone is the battery. Now, this phone has a 4300 milliamp hour battery that supports 30-watt fast charging. Now, at first, this doesn't really seem like a con, and the only reason I'm considering it a con is because in comparison to another phone made by the same company that's actually technically lower end, these battery specs really aren't that impressive. Now, the OnePlus Nord N10 actually has a 5000 milliamp hour battery, and this one only has a 4300 milliamp hour battery. So I'm really not sure why they didn't just give them the same battery. Even though it doesn't sound like a lot, that does make a pretty big difference. When the battery is larger, it not only has a bigger charge that lasts longer in itself, but it also degrades a lot slower. When you have a bigger battery over time, you're not going to notice the battery dying out as much as you would for a smaller battery. With those smaller batteries, as time goes on and the battery degrades, which all batteries do, you're going to notice it a lot more. So it's a little bit disappointing to see that on a higher end phone that's 5G, it actually has a smaller battery than its lower end counterpart. Now, the one good thing is It supports 30-watt fast charging, whereas the N100 only supports 18-watt fast charging, so that's one difference. But under normal circumstances, if you don't have a fast charger, then that's not really going to even matter, whereas the battery size does. So I really do think that in the context of this, it is a bit of a con. Now my next pro for this phone is the camera. This phone has some great camera features, and really it pretty much has everything. The only thing it's really missing is a telephoto lens, which it does have a macro camera. And telephoto lenses are really a flagship phone feature, which this is not. So to give you a full rundown of the camera specs, this phone has a 16 megapixel front-facing camera that looks really great with this hole punch design right here. And then on the back, it has a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel rear camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera to assist with portrait mode, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So you're really getting a lot of features from this camera, and the quality is great as well. If you're using the phone for more photography-based activities, whether you're doing something for social media, websites, streaming, you name it, even with recording videos, this phone is able to shoot 4K at 30 frames per second in the rear camera and 1080p in the front camera. So you really are getting a very high quality camera, whether it's photos or videos you're taking with it. You're definitely not going to go wrong using the camera for this phone. Now another con for this phone is it has no dust or water resistance. Now this is usually more of a higher end feature. Most of the time flagship phones, or at least phones that are really comparable to the flagship phones, have dust and water resistance, whereas the more mid-level and entry-level phones don't. But at the same time, this phone is a 5G phone that has a lot of really nice features. So I would think that that's another thing. Just like with the wireless charging, I do think this is something that I would want to see on more lower end phones, because everyone's going to have that situation once in a while where they would benefit from some dust and water resistance, whether you're in a dirty environment where there's lots of dust in the air, or if it rains a lot or you're near water, whatever the situation may be, it's nice to have some extra protection for your device. So my next pro for this phone is the processor. Now this phone is getting 6 gigabytes of RAM with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 690 5G processor. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this device, and it came back with a single core score of 609 and a multi-core score of 1832. Now these numbers are definitely impressive. To put this into perspective, I believe this phone is actually faster than the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 and the Motorola Moto G stylus, and the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 is a flagship phone actually, and the Motorola Moto G stylus is a very similar phone to this one as far as the range and level goes. So in comparison, for the price, you're getting a lot of processing power. And if you're looking for a device that can perform more demanding activities like photo and video editing, more high levels of content consumption or gaming, but don't want to go into the price range of the high-end devices or the flagship phones, then this is definitely a good option because it's going to give you that type of power and allow you to perform those more demanding activities that the lower end or mid-range phones wouldn't be able to do as well. Now my next con for the phone is that the materials really aren't very premium. The phone does have a really nice, modern, sleek design to it, and I really like that. But at the same time, since it is a really nice phone that has lots of nice features, it's a 5G phone with a great processor, great camera, I would expect it to have more premium materials. I believe this whole thing is made of plastic. I would want to see some metal on here, maybe some glass, at least on the screen. It would be nice to have. Really, it's not a big thing. The phone still does look nice, but when you hold it in your hand, you can tell the materials really don't feel very premium. It doesn't feel cheap at all, but at the same time, it does leave a little bit more to be desired, especially if having a higher end device is important to you. As far as that goes, it really does have some room for improvement. Now, my final pro for the phone is the large storage space. This phone has 128 gigabytes of internal storage with micro SD card expansion, so you're getting a lot of storage in this phone. No matter what you're doing, whether you're just using the phone for basic activities and don't really have anything on it, or if you have large apps like games and that sort of thing, or if you have lots of photos and videos, whatever the case may be, having more storage than you need is always a good thing, especially nowadays when the system is getting so big, apps are getting larger and larger. You're really gonna always benefit from having more storage space because it's better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it. To give you an idea of what this looks like, right now 25.37 gigabytes is being used on the phone. As you can see here, the system is getting very large these days. 20 gigabytes is not a small number at all. And then of course the apps and other files in here, and it's only taking up 20% of the storage space. Now a lot of these phones start out around 64 gigabytes. Now I don't know about you, but having the bare minimum with the system data taking up almost a third of the storage is not really ideal to me. I definitely would want more space than that. And some of the phones are as low as 32 gigabytes. Now, maybe back in 2008, that might have been impressive, but these days, 128 is a great amount. I would say 64 is really a minimum. And to put this into perspective, entry-level iPhones start out at 64 gigabytes themselves, and those phones don't have the ability to use a micro SD card to expand the storage, whereas this one does. So at a fraction of the price, this phone does have a great advantage over an iPhone as far as storage goes. Now my final con for this phone is the software. Now this phone runs on Android 10. Android 10 in and of itself is not a bad software, but we are on Android 11 now. And being that it is a 5G phone with lots of nice new features, a great camera, and being that it's a nice phone with a lot of nice features that other phones in its price range don't have, it would have been nice if this phone had the latest version of Android as well. But this is pros and cons for the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and again, if you want more information about the pricing and availability of the phone, definitely check the link in the description because pricing and availability is always changing. If you enjoyed the video, definitely leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.